Hi, my name is Savannah, and I am one of the analysts in the Housing and Community Development Department. Today I will review how to fill out an acceptable owner-occupied feasibility workbook for AHP applications. I will review each project type individually during this training. First, we will begin with purchase or new construction projects. If your project is a rehabilitation or Habitat for Humanity, please continue to watch for instructions specific to your project type. First off, let's review the difference between purchase and new construction. A purchase project is when you will be requesting down payment and closing cost assistance for your home buyer. The new construction project type is also for home buyer down payment or closing cost assistance. However, it is specifically for projects made up entirely of newly constructed homes where the developer and the contractor is the sponsor. This does not include Habitat for Humanity projects. So, just because you might be working with newly constructed homes doesn't necessarily mean you have a new construction project. Please contact HCD if there is any confusion on this. Before you get started completing the workbook, it's a good thing to know some information about your project. What income levels will you be serving? This is important because this decision will translate into points in the application. What are the typical household sizes and geographical areas you'll be serving? These are questions you'll be asked to complete in the top portion of the feasibility workbook. Please note, this feasibility workbook is based on what you believe your project will do during the life cycle of your project. We understand that homeowner applications are mostly conceptual in nature. If awarded, each disbursement will have its own feasibility workbook and will be judged on its own merits against the feasibility standards set in place for the year the project was awarded. Now, once you've opened the workbook, select the Start Here tab. Next, select Owner-Occupied Purchase or Owner-Occupied New Construction Purchase from the drop-down list. Next, navigate to the appropriate tab and enter your project name and the date you're completing the feasibility workbook. The first section to complete is the project information section. You have 4 different options on how to group the units. If you have 100 units and all of them serve income less than 50% AMI and all in one geographical area, you would then only use the Group 1 column. However, if you have a mixture of areas, household sizes, and income, you might want to use the different grouping columns. Please note the number of units and targeting listed in these columns must match what was entered into AHP Online. FHL Bank publishes income limits that are based on HUD County and non-targeted mortgage revenue bond limits. A link to the current incomes can be found on the tab called HUD MRB Income Limits. The income limits shown are 100% area median income. To determine the 50% limit, multiply the amount shown in the income table by 0.5. To determine the 60% limit, multiply by 0.6, and the 80% limit, multiply by 0.8. Once you've entered the household information, continue completing the remainder of the feasibility workbook. The lower portion will require you to know information about the unit cost. For each grouping, you'll need to know the approximate cost associated with the purchase or construction of the home. For purchases, this includes items like the purchase price, and for new construction, this will include land cost, site work, and construction cost. In addition, both project types will need to know approximate closing fees, front ratio, mortgage interest rate, and term. We will also want to know approximate monthly housing costs such as taxes, insurance, homeowner association fees, mortgage insurance, etc. In this section, you will also be required to enter if you're charging a non-profit sponsor fee, developer fee, and home buyer education fee. Additionally, because we have a minimum home buyer contribution requirement, don't forget to enter the owner down payment. See the current implementation plan for the minimum home buyer down payment. Once this information is entered, take a look at the amount of AHP gap per unit. Make sure this is the number you would like each unit to receive. If you believe you may need more or less subsidy per unit, one of the areas in the workbook that can be adjusted is the front ratio. We understand that this workbook is your best estimate and that the front ratio may adjust for each homebuyer. Please note you may need to go out multiple decimal points in order to get the subsidy to be a whole number. Don't forget to include a description for any area that says Other. If you don't indicate what those are, it will result in follow-up. Make sure that all numbers are positive. If you have any negatives listed here, the cells should turn red. We don't want any red cells in this workbook, so make sure to adjust your numbers if that happens. There are multiple formulas and conditional formatting embedded in this workbook to help make sure you have not exceeded any guidelines. However, please read the current implementation plan and know what guidelines your project type must abide by. If you're having trouble getting the exact AHP subsidy that you need, or any other issues completing the workbook, we offer technical assistance and can assist with the feasibility workbook up until the round closing date. Next, we will move on to completing an owner-occupied rehabilitation feasibility workbook. Habitat for Humanity projects, please continue listening for instructions specific to your project type. Before you get started completing the workbook, it's a good thing to know the typical rehab scenarios you'll be working with. Talk with your local contractors about the costs associated with those rehabs and have them submit estimates with breakdown of materials, quantities, and prices. We will want the scope of work and sample estimates submitted for all different types of rehab jobs you will be working with. Examples would be roof repairs, HVAC systems, plumbing, siding, etc. These estimates are required to be uploaded during the application. Please note, this feasibility workbook is based on what you believe your project will do during the life cycle of your project. We understand that homeowner applications are mostly conceptual in nature. If awarded, each disbursement will have its own feasibility workbook and be judged on its own merits against the feasibility standards set in place for the year the project was awarded. From the Start tab, select Owner-Occupied Rehabilitation in the drop-down box. This will ensure you're completing the correct workbook. The first thing you'll want to do is enter your project name, the date you're completing the feasibility workbook, and the number of units your project will have in the targeting breakdown section. The number of units and targeting must match what was entered into AHP Online. Next, don't forget to answer the developer question. A developer fee will only be allowed if the developer and the sponsor are different entities. So, if you're the sponsor and you're organizing the rehabilitation work, you are only allowed to request the nonprofit sponsor fee, not a developer fee. How you answer the question on the feasibility workbook will indicate what is allowed or not allowed. Please see the current implementation plan for further details or contact HCD with any questions. Once the top section of the workbook is completed, you can move on to the Sources section. This section is used to identify different types of sources for your project. This is where you'll want to enter the AHP subsidy amount and any other grants, donations, or loans that the project may be receiving. Examples of sources of funds would be known weatherization grants, home funds, as well as loans or donation from a Federal Home Loan Bank system member to the homeowner. You'll want to make sure to enter the amounts and whether or not the sources are requested or approved. The next step would be to identify the uses of funds. It is easiest if you group together the different types of rehabs and then enter the associated cost. Make sure to identify which source is paying for what cost, whether it be AHP funds or one of the other sources previously listed. This is also the area where you'll want to indicate if you are charging a nonprofit sponsor fee, developer, or homeowner education fee, and whether or not you'll be requesting reimbursement for a third-party inspection. If you are awarded an AHP subsidy, you will be required to show the work was completed by submitting a third-party inspection. Don't forget to include a description of any area that says Other. If you don't indicate what those are, it will result in follow-up. Remember, we offer technical assistance and can assist with preparing the feasibility workbook until the round closing deadline. Finally, I will review how to fill out an acceptable Habitat for Humanity feasibility workbook. Please note, this feasibility workbook is based on what you believe your project will do during the life cycle of your project. We understand that homeowner applications are mostly conceptual in nature. If awarded, each disbursement will have its own feasibility workbook and will be judged on its own merits against the feasibility standards set in place for the year the project was awarded. Once you've opened the workbook, Make sure Habitat for Humanity Purchase Feasibility is selected on the Start tab. This will ensure you're completing the correct workbook. The first thing you'll want to do is enter your project name, the date you're completing the feasibility workbook, and the targeting your project will have. The number of units and targeting must match what was entered into AHP Online. Once the top section of the workbook is completed, you can move on to sections A through C. This is the sources section. You will have to know approximate mortgage amounts, which will calculate net present value. You will also want to know approximate amounts for in-kind sources, such as donated land, professional labor, and donated materials. Next are actual cash sources, including homebuyer contributions. See the current implementation plan for the minimum homebuyer contribution. Include any cash contribution and any other sources the homebuyer might have, like fundraising, home funds, CDBG, IDAs, etc. At this point, the AHP gap will indicate it's negative with a red cell. Ignore this for now and move on to sections F and G, which are the costs. The AHP gap will adjust as costs are entered. In these sections, we want you to enter the costs associated with building the home and the cost the home buyer will have at the time of closing. Any land cost, building materials, closing costs, lender fees, etc. This is also the section where you will enter the nonprofit sponsor fee and the home buyer education fee if you are charging them. In both the cost and sources section, don't forget to include a description of any areas that say other. If you don't indicate what those are, it will result in follow-up. Once you are done completing the cost section, the AHP gap should be a positive number and should no longer be red. If the AHP gap is not where you would want it to be, you will want to go back and adjust your estimated workbook. For example, the amount of fundraising may go up or down depending on what's happening with the project at a certain point in time. So if you think you'll need more AHP funds, the amount of fundraising may need to be lowered. We understand that the feasibility workbook submitted during the application process is an estimate and may change. Remember, we are able to provide technical assistance up until the round closing deadline. This concludes our presentation. If you have questions, please refer to FHL Bank's website, Community Programs tab, where the current AHP implementation plan and all other resources can be found. You can also find contact information for Housing and Community Development staff under the Contact tab on the AHP website.